Hi, my name is Dr. Frank Prosciutti. I'm a clinical psychologist, and this is my channel called Dr. Frank's Therapoems. Now, I'm the kind of doctor that's a clinical psychologist, and I've been a psychotherapist, clinical psychologist, for about 50 years. And recently retired. Thought to myself, there might be things that I can share with people that could be found helpful that I learned over that period of time as a therapist. And one of the things I decided to do was to try to distill some major concepts down into some simple, rhyming, rhythmic poems that I call Therapoems. And the reason I call them Therapoems is because they're mostly related to topics that come up in therapy. And they're the kinds of metaphors and analogies that people remember later on. Oftentimes, long after their therapy is over, they may hold on to one of those metaphors, and it just gives them a reminder of what they have worked so hard on trying to accomplish. This is episode 5, and it's called Taking the Un Out of the Unconscious. And you hear people saying sometimes, what you don't know can't hurt you. But I feel a little differently about that. I think what you don't know can kind of hurt you, especially if it's something within you that you're not aware of, that if light was shed on it, it might lead you to do things differently or not get into situations you may regret. But anyway, the word unconscious, the idea of an unconscious is only, a little over 100 years old when you think about it, as far as it's getting popularized by Sigmund Freud. And then since then, a lot of people like Carl Jung have talked a little bit more about it more extensively. But Freud's initial ideas were that there's this part of us that we're not aware of. And it was a hard sell in the beginning because we're very tangibly oriented as physical beings to wanting to see, hear, touch, smell, and taste. And the idea of an abstract concept like an unconscious and how that could be some part of me that I'm not aware of, that affects my body or affects my emotions. It took a little time, but now these days people will say my unconscious did it. But clinically, it's very important. And in the more traditional psychological understanding of the unconscious, and people sometimes substitute it with subconscious, but largely what I like to use is the word unconscious. There are a couple of ways in which it might work. For instance, repression. You may have heard that, where people had an experience or had something happen, and maybe it was charged or they couldn't integrate it at the time, and it might be difficult for them, like having a trauma, and they may put it out of their awareness. And we have the ability to do that, to put it out of our awareness and forget we forgot. Now, the difference between repression and suppression is like you have a phone bill or you have something else going on. You haven't forgotten that it exists. You just want to put it out of your mind for now. And so it's not like occupying headspace for you. But it also, and this is something I'll talk about in future episodes, the unconscious, the reason we say turn within is because out of the unconscious come many capacities and abilities that many times people don't recognize they have or haven't actualized yet. And sometimes it has to move through some of the more conventional ways, the unconscious, where you might have unconscious thoughts, thinking that you have taken on that you don't even realize it affects the choices you make or don't make. Certainly we have unconscious feelings. Sometimes, maybe I've talked about this in previous episodes, we have feelings we're comfortable with and they are easy to identify and register and experience, but others which we're not. So when we're impacted and that feeling is predominantly affected, maybe we push it out of our awareness. But that doesn't mean it's not affecting us. As a matter of fact, Freud's position on this was that we spend a lot of energy keeping the unconscious out of awareness, energy that we could free up. And I've also talked about how unconscious feelings, the energy can get spent that we can feel depressed, just no energy, and really, literally, or have symptoms of depression. Or when it starts percolating up closer to the surface, maybe we feel more anxiety. But past issue, when I talk about the unconscious, when people would come and see me in therapy, I'd often say, we all have an unconscious. And it's unconscious to all of us, therapists included. Everybody has a part of them they may not be aware of. And it may not only become evident until something triggers it. It could be a crisis. It could be something that goes on in the present thematically that associates to this whatever unconscious experience we had or feeling we had that gets activated and comes to the surface. And oftentimes we'll say, for example, someone reacts to a situation and it seems to be a reaction that seems beyond what's warranted for what occurred. And as a therapist, we might think, is there something else in here that's loading up with that, something that they're not aware of? That just to bring it to their awareness, and also maybe when they can disentangle that and understand that there's something from the past that has not been fully resolved, both cognitively or emotionally, the energy can be let out of that. Maybe they need to have a feeling, or they need to understand that that's operating and not be aware of it. But oftentimes, like I said, a crisis can bring it to a head in our lives. And I have a poem that is called "It Started with a Crisis." And let me share this with you. It started with a crisis arising in his life. When he was told what had occurred, it felt as if a knife was driven deep into his heart. He stood in silent shock. His legs began to falter as though the ground did rock. At first, he couldn't focus, not knowing what to do, initially denying what occurred was even true. But soon reality set in, and then from deep inside, a wave of strong emotion rose, and suddenly he cried. That ordeal led him to a path he thought he'd never walk, where he'd set out to find someone to listen and to talk. He spoke about that crisis and some others he'd repressed. His heart was broken open now, and though he tried his best, the feelings of those older hurts no longer stayed inside. They surfaced to awareness from the places where they lied. Like lava through volcanic vents, the fissures in his heart allowed those feelings to come through and let healing start. And once his feelings got diffused, the old ones and the new, he felt transformed, lighthearted now, in ways he never knew. To self-reflect and look within was something he ignored. Engaging in such practices he thought was self-absorbed. And though his life ordeal caused pain, he now can clearly see why many say a crisis offers opportunity. So a crisis will bring forth intense emotions many times. And of course, when people come in many times to the therapist, they're in crisis or something's broke. I mean, when people would come in, I said, what hurts? Basically, why are you here? Are you just here to explore therapy and want an intellectual understanding of what goes on with those therapists or in therapy? When something is really wrong, you're motivated to maybe be more vulnerable and open up in ways that maybe you don't typically do so with other people. And maybe there's a lot, these days there's much less stigma around psychotherapy than there used to be 20, 50 years ago. And as a matter of fact, right now, there's a lot of people using therapists. I don't know many who don't have waiting lists, but there's a lot of things to be fearful or have different feelings about these days. It's turbulent times. But anyway, the idea of a crisis, how it can trigger, sometimes it can trigger an old experience that's similar by association that you haven't finished with and that needs more time. But there's also the certain dynamics that can establish themselves that you may not have really registered and realize how you're more inclined to have them affect different areas of your life. And for this, I would sometimes give people the image of an octopus, and have it turned upside down where its tentacles affect. Let's say you have had a critical father, and he was always saying things like you were never good enough, he wasn't particularly affectionate, so it really hurt that much more, didn't give feedback in a way that may have been helpful, and you may have been hurt by that as a young woman or man. And so later on in life, you have trouble wanting to listen to teachers, male teachers particularly. You may find also at jobs, it's hard for you to be told what to do, or you find that affects your performance on a job. Or coaches, you're not coachable, or you don't want anybody, you can't believe any coach really cares for your welfare, or maybe they're giving somebody else a better break. There might be all kinds of ways in which you perceive that person hurting you And you may not be aware that a lot of that ties back to that original hurt, which may lie outside your awareness until somebody helps tie it together for you. But let me give you a little poem I put together. It's called An Octopus Turned Up. There it is. When you've got buried issues remaining unresolved, their impacts can affect you until their problem is solved. Not knowing their existence and being in the blind, they're like turned up octopuses hiding in your mind. Its tentacles can infiltrate the many ways you live, your work, your health, relationships, and the love you give. Once issues get identified and rooted at their core, when remedied and rectified, they'll trouble you no more. All the ways they influenced your life will then be ceased, with areas held in their grasp, loosened and released. So if an octopus with issues lies within your mind, its problematic tentacles give clues to what you'll find. And that's what we would be doing in therapy. If somebody brought in something, I would say, this is happening over here, this is happening over here. I wonder, and I will have already, talk to them about, in the first session or so, about relationships in the past. But it may not evidence itself right away that they're starting to have trouble. And you start getting a hunch or a hypothesis that maybe this person has troubles with men, in whatever, it could be a male or a female. And what is it that happens there? It could come up in a marriage. It could come up in a committed relationship where you start projecting out onto that person qualities of where you were wounded. And they may not possess that. Maybe it's somebody who you're living with and they're saying, hey, you don't mind cleaning up after yourself, and you hear that as a major rejection rather than, just a request. Get along. Another element of this is that I believe in the healing potential of the unconscious. Just like our body knows what to do if allowed to employ its systems for healing, our mind knows what to do. There's an element there, especially if it's helped along, but there's that way in which it's almost as if we reenact and bring back to our doorstep situations where we're needing to learn something. Freud had called it a repetition compulsion. Why do I keep doing this? I've seen numerous people over the years where they'll have gone through 3 significant relationships and they'll start realizing, oh, maybe it's me. Maybe I am reenacting in these situations something that I keep thinking is the other person causing me pain and suffering. And I'm never getting through that and realizing, that is a reenactment on my part. And I have a poem for that. It's called Deja Vu. And this one I'm going to find immediately. Do you repeat and then react to problems that you reenact? Well, if you do and came to see that there's another way to be, you might just find that what transpires comes like a phoenix out of fire, rising again to recreate familiar outcomes that you hate. Is there a sense that there may be a certain similarity to what you face again in life that brings familiar forms of strife? Then look inside and find the key for why you so repeatedly inclined to replicate and bear effects from what you're unaware. Tackle the monster, face the ghost, deal with that which scares you the most. Get to the heart of what's not right, or it will keep you up at night. Now, living life gives us plenty of opportunities to bring forth places where we need to grow. And I think at first, sometimes we're clearing where some wounds have taken place or needing to change beliefs that we don't even realize we have. There's a cute story about this, and I'll have an episode specifically on beliefs, but there's a story about a young woman who's with her mom, and she's actually a child, a young girl, and her mom's, cutting off the ends of a ham and putting it in the oven. And, her daughter says, Mom, why do we always cut off the ends of the ham and put it in the oven? She says, I don't know, that's what Grandma always told me to do. And so she said, I have to ask Grandma. So Grandma said, well, that was because our oven was so small in that house we were living in, and I had to do that, or we weren't going to have enough room for all the other things that were going to go with that ham. So sometimes you just carry out beliefs and you don't really examine them, or they just become part of who you are. And if those beliefs are self-limiting about you, I mean, let's say I've been indoctrinated to think I'm a no for good, or that I am never going to be good at anything, or maybe I had a father who was saying critical things to me, and my message was, I'm a good for nothing, basically. I mean, I can operate on that belief, and I've taken it on. So, but there's ways in which these unconscious thoughts and feelings can surface, and one place is interesting. They can come up in your dreams. Because at night, your guard is down, and maybe if there's something bothering you and it's kind of been pushed away, or maybe you forgot about it, but it sort of like gnaws at you, and you're not giving it attention because you're busy and you don't really want to think about this anyway, and maybe you repressed it long ago for good reason. There's a lot of pain attached to it. Well, dreams are interesting. I mean, people will say, oh, dreams, it's just a bunch of garbage from the day. Things can, of course, you could be leaning the wrong way against your pillow and have a dream that you're being beheaded or something, but that might be triggered by the discomfort in your neck. Alternatively, you might have a dream where it's loaded with symbols and representations, and only you really can kind of come up with that. Because sometimes people say, I dreamt of something, and it's a symbol that we all have. Sometimes it applies, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's a very specific symbol in your life, and it may come up repeatedly, which is interesting. Let me read this last poem to you. And this is something that I think, may strike a chord. It's called Rattled to Insight. And you can see the image here. I had a dream so frightening, it jolted me awake. I found myself out walking through a path with lots of snakes. They filled the ground, or all around. I wanted to get through. I tried to step between them, but the spaces were so few. While some snakes slumbered, undisturbed, some others slithered by. But then one rattled suddenly and raised its head up high, positioning itself to strike. I then abruptly woke. My heart was pounding, and my sweat had made my pillow soak. I laid there thinking if I could arrive at some insight, because I've had that dream before, which wakes me up at night. It seems to come from time to time. I want to find a key, to learn what it may symbolize, what I may need to see. As I reflected through the night, awareness came with dawn. I realized that this dream occurs when I fear something's wrong. I further came to recognize when my fears get denied, they rise up from the darker places where they tend to hide. But when acknowledged and addressed, my dreams can help me see what's down in my unconscious that is calling out to me. Now, I found something interesting about dreams, and I think maybe if you reflect on them, some people said they don't dream, and I realize that they are not aware of their dreams. I sat in a Jungian dream group when I was in grad school, and I became so vigilant to my dreams and so interested in understanding them that for a while I would be waking up at night right after I had one. It wasn't necessarily a nightmare, but I was so pre-programmed in my mind to want to understand these dreams and talk about them in my group with the people who are also interested in talking about theirs. So a lot of times I will say to people, and therapists who encourage clients to think about their dreams many times start bringing them in. Or I'll say something like, put a glass of water by your bedside and drink half a glass and say to yourself, tomorrow morning when I drink the other half, I'll remember my dreams. Sometimes you got to make a suggestion to yourself to bring it forward. But here's the point about repetitive dreams and how it can represent something and be helpful to you. For instance, I had a sick mom, and I was living farther away as I was in grad school, 700 miles away, and I would be concerned about her. And so when that concern rose up, many times I wasn't consciously aware of it. I was so busy that I was just busily taking on the day. But if something came up or I had a concern, many times I'd have this dream that my childhood home was on the shore of the ocean, on the beach. And over time, this dream progressed, where as she got sicker, the house and the foundation eroded more and more. But anytime I'd have that dream, once I was helped understanding what it represented in my life, I would call home. I would say, okay, I guess I haven't been in touch with the fact that I'm starting to worry about the welfare of my mom. And so the dream itself, it worked in a reverse way. If I had the dream, I thought, okay, you must need to call home because you're having that dream. So if you can unlock the key to what your dream, if it's repetitive, may symbolize, and recognize that sometimes we are so conflicted. We want to see and we don't want to see. Our unconscious may be filled with things we pushed out of awareness in the first place. So sometimes if you have a therapist who kind of holds the rope for you while you go down into that well of your mind, and if you get frightened, you can tug and they'll pull you up. There's that sense of I'll go further if you support me into places that maybe I won't tread alone. So I have a lot of things to say about the unconscious, but for now, this is the more conventional way a lot of therapists will work with it. Later on, I'm going to talk about what else lies within your unconscious, other attributes, other capacities that maybe you not even realize you have. And so that's all for today. Thanks for tuning in. Oh, one last thing before I go. This is a community space, and I welcome any thoughts you might have, comments or suggestions about future episodes. You'll see my email posted at the end of the credits. And I'm hoping that some of the poems and the information may have struck a chord with you. And speaking of chords, and so for now, I'll say goodbye and hope you'll try to give some thought to what was taught, and then abide in a place of peacefulness with lots of happiness inside.
Dr. Frank's Therapoems was produced by The Splash Marketing. The poems and illustrations can be found in his book, Can I Be Frank? Poetic Insights that Empower and Inspire. Illustrations in the book are provided by Craig M. Lindemann. You're welcome to share these poems for non-profit purposes, but please remember to cite their source. Dr. Frank can be contacted at dr.frankstherapoems@gmail.com.